Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 634. Premiering at the 2024 Monster Fest Film Festivals this October 12 is Freelance, a horror thriller that stars Nicole Pastor as a near destitute freelance editor who takes on a high-paying job cutting a snuff film, a decision that leads her down a dark path with no escape. Gritty psychological horror mystery filmmaking that is as uncompromising in its filmmaking as it is engaging in its storytelling. Freelance also marks the latest film from director John Balazs, who I'm going to say joins me now on the podcast. John, how are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And last time we talked to each other, Rage was the film we talked about.
Right.
It's been a few years since then. Interesting thing about Freelance, though, is that this is based on a short film by the screenwriter, Mike Giardino, New York City-based screenwriter. He actually wrote and directed a short as well back in 2022, I'm pretty sure it was. And usually how it goes is the guy who wrote and directed a short makes his own feature afterwards.
Mhm.
But in this case, he does the screenplay and you're directing it. How does it come about that this guy from New York City made this short, has his screenplay, gets in touch with you, and you make this movie? I'm really curious about that.
Well, actually, what it was is I was trolling through the Red List and I saw the screenplay, I saw the synopsis, and I was like, this sounds really good because I can relate to it as an editor. So this script really, spoke to me. So I emailed him asking for a copy of the script. I assumed because it was on the Red List that it was available to be purchased and, I can negotiate copyright with it. But what he said was that he's actually creating a short film version of it for festivals in New York and in the States. But he pretty much said, look, if you want the script, it's yours to have. I just want to retain copyright for the short film version of it. And I was like, yeah, go for it. That's fine. My intention was always to make a feature about it. And then yeah, I read the feature script, and he asked me if I wanted it, and I said yeah straight away because I just trusted his judgment with the characters and his storytelling ability through the script. So that was it was a really quick and effortless transition to go from him giving us a script to us then getting it made.
The whole snuff film aspect of the movie,
Mm.
incredibly interesting reading, kind of like going back into like the background of this kind of like almost kind of like this theoretical urban legend like style of murder on film for profit.
Yeah.
Never to be really proven to have ever existed, but like there's always like rumblings about it, and films have touched on it. I think the first and most notorious was a 1976 film called Snuff, I think it was called.
Mhm.
They kind of delved into it, and other films have since then. When you look at the screenplay and see that aspect of the film of this story in Freelance, do you do a bit of a deep dive into like the background of what this kind of film, and how it kind of relates to kind of like the internet age, especially this age of social media, the whole kind of snuff concept? Because for a long time it was like this thing where, in dark alleys in places in New York City or maybe South America, people like
Yeah.
um these groups of like, these kind of like, really perverted kind of guys are watching these movies. But now, like, so much crap on the internet now, especially with the dark web kind of stuff. Who
Yeah.
knows what's out there? But I'm just curious about what your kind of like research into that whole aspect is.
I'm a child of the 90s and 2000s, so there were always forbidden websites that you'd go to that you'd look at, and they just had the most horrible footage. Every high school kid shared links and stuff like that. So, I'm not going to say I'm desensitized to it all, but I've seen some pretty messed up stuff. Some of it was done by visual effects guys just trying to promote their work and getting it out there. That was before it went viral.
Mm.
And some of it, you really question whether or not it was real. I tried not to, and mind you, that was like 10, 15 years ago. I tried not to do any sort of research into snuff because I knew that I just didn't want that for my mental health or anything like that.
Mm.
I think what Mike wrote on the script and what was on the page was enough for me to go with. Like I didn't need to research how to put a woman in a bag and vacuum it. Like he pretty much and mind you, I don't know how he researched it, so I'm not going to get into that. I didn't really need to. I just basically took what was on the page and be like, all right, how can I shoot this in the most gruesome manner possible, but at the same time not delve into the realm of making it into a film that is exploitation. if you will.
Yeah.
So I mean, I didn't really research much. I mean, one of my main suggestions was, and it was quickly shut down by the producers, was like, should I download real snuff footage from evil websites and use that? And then we had a discussion, and we just think if they are real, because you can never tell, if they are real, it would be morally wrong to use that kind of footage, in your opening credits. So we just went away, we did it ourselves. But I'm going to go ahead and say that I really didn't research as to what. I mean, the only thing that I really took away from knowing about snuff films per se was like most of the time they're shot really badly. They're shot on handy cams and or on your phone. It's very rarely a big lavish production with lights and camera, high-end cameras or anything like that. They're done very cheap and on the fly. So we tried to emulate that when we were shooting our own versions of the snuff film. But yeah, just for my own mental sanity and health, I tried to avoid it as much as possible.
Speaking of mental sanity and health, the work of the freelancer, something I know a lot about as a freelance writer and critic, and you spoke just before about being a freelance editor. I work with many ebbs and flows, more downs than ups. And it's during those downs of like when you can't find work or whether work's scarce or where we have to do work that's like cheap as chips, but it's the only thing that's out there.
Yeah.
You kind of really kind of go into like this kind of bit of a spiral. It's like, oh, what the hell am I doing? How did I find out myself in this position? And then it's countered by something that's really awesome that kind of comes along and such. And it's really interesting when we first meet Nicole's character in the movie. She's really in that back end of like, what am I doing in my life? I'm nearing, I'm cutting porn and, I'm doing all this other stuff. And it's really kind of interesting, kind of delve into the life of what it is to be a freelancer at times, and that sometimes you can't pay your bills. Sometimes you're going to be behind in a lot of stuff. And it's all just about hustling and getting out there. And while, you and I, of course, have not gone down like the limestone that Katie does in the movie, and that's Nicole's character in the film. I'm sure there's been moments in your life, as there have been in mine, where you're just like, oh, fucking hell, I mean, when's this going to
Yeah.
change, kind of thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, you know, her editing porn, the aspect of that is on page one of the script. That's what drew me in. I myself edited porn for a little bit as well, just out of desperation to make money. Very quickly left that because I woke up one morning and like, what am I doing with my life? I should be a filmmaker, not editing this smart. So I really related to her. I really related to her plight and her struggles and waiting for invoices to be cleared and following
Yeah.
up with clients and just all the roughness that goes along with working for yourself in a field that is so, I guess, underappreciated. The time and the effort that goes into creating a video. Oftentimes people neglect to see that side of things, that hey, there's a whole life flow that happens to a project after it's shot, and I think a lot of the times the editor gets a raw deal at the end of the journey. But yeah, I really did relate to Nicole's character, Katie, just because I have been in that situation before where I'm like, I'm an editor. Why aren't people coming to me? What's my next gig? I'm cold calling. I'm sending out emails that I know are going to get ignored. So I know that feeling. And I think that was the biggest draw card for me to undertake this because I was able to really understand the character. And that saying, write what you know.
Yes.
Well, this is kind of like I didn't write it, but I kind of directed what I know. I know the struggle. I know the plight and all that. I mean, I'm very thankful now personally in my life that the last few years have been very generous to me, so I haven't had to worry too much. But there's always periods of time when you're like, shit, it's a bit quiet. I better do something at the moment. But yeah, I really felt for Katie, especially in my 20s. I was like that. I was like Katie. So I knew what she was going through to a certain extent. Obviously, I never got myself into the kind of trouble she gets herself into. But I just thought, what would be my deepest struggle, and then heighten that, and give it to her character. But yeah, I related to her. I felt sorry for her, and I think having discussions with Nick about what I do, and sometimes we sat down and I told her about what it's like to be an editor, the kind of challenges you face and all that. I think she really took it on board, and I think she's done a fantastic job with it.
The Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you'll love. She has, like, Nicole is just one of these actors that are out there in our industry right now, burgeoning actress.
Yep.
Last movie I saw her in was The Cost, small role but pivotal role in that movie.
Yep.
This is like a big lead performance for her.
Yep.
It's a demanding role, and she really rises to the occasion for
Yeah.
this movie. And I'm not only talking about kind of like the physical aspects, which have its own kind of like demands on in this movie, but just the way that she can portray anxiousness, nerves, kind of the not only the physical manifestations of those things, but also the inner psychological kind of turmoil that she's gone through.
Mhm.
It's quite a hard-hitting performance. What did you know of Nicole beforehand? What was it like working for her in this movie? And were there moments in the film where, well, especially when it gets to the more heavier moments of the movie, when his character goes through, and she goes through quite a bit. What were those moments like where you have to kind of like work with Nicole to, direct her through moments in the film that can get really heavy, and like really dark and such? Because I imagine like maybe as an actor, trying to find those kind of places could be lead them to be in very vulnerable states, and that's where a great kind of a director like yourself can really kind of help them guide them through those really vulnerable states to get the film, get the performance on film and in the can and done for the day.
Well, okay, so I found Nicole. There was a blog about the 20 most up and comers in Australian cinema, the new blood coming out. Um, and I knew someone that worked with her, so I emailed the guy and I emailed him and I said, anyway, you can get me in touch with her. I'd love to connect with her, see what we can work on potentially in the future. They connected us, and I think the biggest thing with Nicole and I is that we became really good friends to start off with.
Mm,
Um, there became a level of trust where a certain look or a certain, you know, sound or a certain way of talking, we knew what we were talking about each other. It was very, very shorthand talk. But we spent a lot of time before filming getting to know each other on a very personal level as well. And I think you have to. I think there's got to be a time when, especially when you're demanding so much of an actress, that you not only take the time in pre-production and actual production to get these performances and get to know them out, get to know their personalities. You got to take the time before you shoot and before you do pre-production to get to know them. And that is sometimes spending a lot of time with them on the phone or just, messaging each other a lot or just, you know, sharing past experiences with each other and just opening up. She was very generous with me because she opened up a lot. She told me about her life. She told me about her inner thoughts, her inner fears, her inner desires, and things like that. And the more she opened up to me, the more I saw Katie in her, to be honest with you. She really did relate to the character. So when I cast Nicole, I already knew that she needed very little direction. And there's that saying, casting is 99%, 90% directing,
yes.
is casting. And that's true. You get a good cast, you really don't have to work too much on the set with her because she knows the character. Every decision she makes is within the realm of that character. So she really didn't need too much directing, and she was so disciplined with this role. She took it to heart, and like you said, yeah, there was some very challenging scenes and challenging demands, and because I got to know her so well before shooting, all I had to do was say, "Hey, do you remember that time you told me about that story? Or do you remember that time you told me about what happened to you? Or do you remember that time you felt this certain way? I want you to just think about that in this scene." And she just clicked and she'd snap. And because I already knew that history about her, she just got it, 2 takes max. That
Mm.
she's a 2-take person. Um, I think getting to know her before the shoot and having her as a friend was really important to having her portray this kind of character, to be honest with you. And I gave her a lot of films to watch. I think the biggest, I guess, influence that I would, that I recommended to her to watch was Black Swan.
Hmm.
Just that paranoia building up, building up, building up. And I think she really took that into, I guess, into her stride and just go, okay, how can I amplify this, and how can I take that paranoia into the situation of the film? So I think she did fantastic. She carries the film.
The thing that's really interesting about Freelance, especially in regards to Katie's character, and it's something that I kind of struggle with, especially since became a father,
Mhm.
is the impact that of the things that I watched that have on me, the impact it has psychologically or spiritually,
Yeah,
upon myself. The things I could have watched when I was in my 20s, for
yeah,
example, and I can't watch
yeah,
now, you know.
yeah.
Example is that later this week I'm going to watch the new Terrifier movie,
Mhm.
and I'm kind of trepidous to watch it, not because I'm scared per se, but because the violence that Damien Leone does in the movie, sometimes I'm just like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready for it, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
And I imagine with Katie's character, with her, like, even though we kind of see her kind of like in like really, in a position of like, editing porn, that when it comes to editing the stuff that this anonymous person sends to her, the psychological effects it has on her is just paramount throughout the film. It's like something like she has nightmares, she has,
Mhm.
hallucinations, all this stuff. And it makes me think sometimes, what's the stuff that I'm watching? How does that kind of affecting
Yeah,
me psychologically?
yeah.
Because I know a lot of people say, and I totally 100% believe this, that like a film or a piece of art can't necessarily dictate a person's behavior or influence a person's behavior,
No.
but it can have an impact in some sort of way. It must, right? And when I was watching that movie, and when I was watching Freelance, I was thinking to myself, sometimes the stuff that I watch, I think I really need to scale back with this stuff sometimes, because I do watch a lot of horror,
Yeah.
and such as well. But I don't know. I don't know whether it's the thing about getting older or becoming a dad, or what have you. I just find that my breaking points have shrunk a little bit more, have become more limited.
No, I
And
get what you're saying.
I don't know whether that makes me a bad, film critic, or whatever have you, but just who I am as a person. I'm just curious whether the same thing has happened to you as you
Yeah,
come older
it
too.
has. It has. I mean, I can't watch any films or any documentaries now that involve kids.
Yeah, yeah,
Prior to having kids, I used to watch, missing cases and all these sorts of stuff, and it never really affected me the way that it does now. I just refuse to watch it now because, as a father, you just can't fathom that happening to you. In terms of, I guess, what you just said, I don't think it makes you a softer movie critic. I just think that your values have heightened a bit, and it changes who you are. You look at violence in a different way, you look at sex in a different way, you look at profanity in a different way. I think it's more about maturity. For example, in my 20s, I was writing a script about World War II,
mhm,
and during that time, I was researching the Holocaust, and like I went to the Jewish Museum in Elsternwick to look at the letters that these people sent back home. Mind you, I had no business trying to do a World War II film in my 20s. The
right,
maturity level was not there. But researching it and researching things like the Einsatzgruppen and the death squads in Ukraine and all that shit gave me nightmares, to the point where I'm like, all right, I'm going to stop doing this, because I'm seeing footage and I'm seeing vision of people being tortured and killed and all that. And if it comes to the point where it's keeping me up at night, I know it's not good for me. So I'm just going to let that go.
yeah,
But as you get older, for example, with Freelance, a 20-year-old would have made this about gore and violence and like really being more open about it and upfront about it. But as you're getting, I'm 40 now, so I'm thinking about, all right, how does sound come into it? You
hmm
can hear it, you don't have to see it. It's just terrifying. You don't need to see all the horrible, terrible things that are happening to a person. You can hear it, or you can insinuate it. You can have a reflection on her glasses. You can see it on the timeline. You can have a quick cutaway, quick flashes. I was very aware of not wanting to make it about the actual snuff itself,
yeah,
and I think that is because of my maturity in a way, because I'm like, you don't need to see it. Let's cut it back. I'm not thinking like a 20-year-old filmmaker anymore. The same way you're probably not thinking about a 20-year-old critic.
mm,
It's got something to do with maturity. It's got something to do with understanding what you're watching. It's got something to do with violence is violence because of this. Sex is sex because of this. People swear because of this. It just comes about understanding the human condition, if you will. And it just comes with age. In 10 years' time, I'll be making films, hopefully, that understand better than I do now. So it's a progression. So it does happen. But yeah, as I get older and I have kids, I'm definitely nothing to do with kids or anything to do with that. I'm staying away from it completely.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere.
Yeah.
I'm same in that regard too. If and again, going back to the Terrifier for example, supposedly there's things like that in the movie. I'm just like, oh god, I don't know whether I'm gonna be ready
Look,
for
you
this.
gotta take you gotta take Terrifier with a grain of salt because I think it's so self-aware. It's so
Mm,
self-aware of what it's doing. It's always trying to outgore itself. So, you know, I think you need to go in there with a sense of like, all right, this is a show. You know,
yeah,
this is really good special effects. It's what it's like going to see John Wick 4 or whatever. It's like, all right, how many creative ways can I kill someone now? You know, it's like, all
yeah.
right, what are they going to come up with next? You know, it's bullshit, but you're like, all right, where's the ride? Take me for a ride in this. But I can see what you're saying. Sometimes it's a bit, come on, guys, it's a bit too much now. You know, you get sick in
Yeah.
the stomach.
Sometimes you do. I don't know, but interestingly, I read that the films of the 90s, psychological thrillers in the 90s, David Fincher, a prime example, is someone that had a real kind of influence on the making of this film.
Yes.
And I do see that in the film, and especially in the soundtrack and editing and such. But I also see another influence in there, and it might come from Mike being like a New York City writer. I see a lot of kind of like Abel Ferrara, Paul
Mhm.
Schrader,
Mhm.
kind of like these really kind of gritty um, odysseys into
Yeah.
kind of like these subterranean underground kind of worlds. Because I think of movies like I don't know if you've ever seen it, Hardcore with George C. Scott that Paul Schrader did back in the 1970s. Oh, that's one for you.
Oh, check it out.
And like I said before, the films are Abel Ferrara, like something like Bad Lieutenant or something like. I think of films like that when I watch Freelance, right?
Mhm.
In regards to going down these really murky kind of roads and the
Yeah.
psychological effects of on it. Did you kind of get a feel of that as well when you were reading the screenplay? That kind of like the very kind of, and I don't know why it's very New York based, maybe because a lot of these films are based in New York, but
Yeah.
that kind of like 70s, 80s New York grit that some of those films have,
Yeah, I
and you
did.
kind of mix it with the Fincher kind of like stylish kind of stuff as well.
I did. I did. The only thing that really sets it apart is the internet age in the film and
Of
the
course, yeah.
communication and stuff like that. So, look, um, obviously 8mm had a profound impact on me as well, with this film because that film's about snuff footage and the search for whether or not it's real. Um, you mentioned, 80s and 90s thrillers. I love that genre. I think Longlegs was recently the only one that really revisited that kind of
Mm.
90s thriller as it is, Didn't reinvent the wheel, but it just gave you a clean film. I was very inspired by 80s and 90s thrillers with this one. What was the most difficult thing with Freelance was trying to make it not New York and trying to make it
Mm.
not gritty. And like when you read the script, it has such a, like you said, like an urban decay to it, like a seven or something like that.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Um, what was difficult was trying not to do that
Hmm.
and trying to put it to Australia. So we did have to get rid of words. We did have to get rid of New York slang and things like that in the script because we're like, and Australians aren't going to get it. They're not going to understand, let's go down to blah, blah, blah's Delhi and stuff like that. I'm sure if you live in New York, you know where that is, right? But we don't know it here. So we had to make it speak to an audience here, where in turn it will then speak to a more universal audience once it's released. So the the challenge was getting a script that does have that, that vibe to it, but then unpackaging it to make it not have that vibe. And that was done through costume, set design, the production design and things like that. So yeah, that was the most tricky part for it.
Um, I don't get a chance to ask this much of filmmakers' opening credits.
Yeah.
I think there's a lost art to opening credits these days, and I really love the opening credits that you have in this movie. Nicole's at the computer, she's editing, and on the edit screen is like cast and crew
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. Loved it. How much thoughts do you put into your opening credits, especially for this film? Was that like an idea you always had you wanted to kind of play with, or is it
Yeah.
something that
Yeah.
came fresh with this movie? How did it all kind of come
So
about?
I mean, David Fincher to me is like my all-time favorite filmmaker.
Yeah.
So I was very, very inspired. Everything I do is inspired by Fincher, down to the color grade. Um, I've always loved his opening credits. You know, you look at Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, you look at
Oh
Fight
yeah,
Club, you know,
definitely.
you look at Panic Room, you know, they're just all really, really good title sequences.
Yeah,
And I thought, all right, how can I do David Fincher on a $6 budget? You know?
right.
And then I thought, well, the whole movie is about editing. The whole movie is about being inside this computer. And like, well, I'm just going to film myself doing an opening credit for the film and taking the viewer inside the editing program, basically. Um, I like to think we achieved something like that, you know, that goes on par with it. My brother Chris in America did the music for it as well. So, you know, it became this whole collaborative affair with the DOP, myself, and, you know, the music from the States and things like that. So I just thought, you know, it would be a really fun way to introduce an audience to the tone of the film early on with the music and the imagery and things like that, and at the same time a creative way to do the actual cast and crew, you know, letters and blocking and things like that. So that came to me even before we shot the film. I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the people inside the computer screen and all that. But I think opening credits have become such a lost art form. You know, you go back to Hitchcock, and that was one of the most exciting parts of his film, the opening credits. I really do hope they make a comeback, but unfortunately, audiences these days, they want their quick fix straight away, jump in to something, and you know, they don't give enough time now to be immersed in, you know, an opening credit sequence anymore. But I love them. I love them. I wish I can do more of them.
I love a really great opening credit sequence because number one, you can get really creative with it, and I think it
Yeah.
sets the tone visually,
Yeah.
sonically, of course, with the music and such as
Yeah.
well. What we're going to have. And what you were saying before is like reminds me of the conversation we had in regard to Rage. Some people were like, "Oh, it's too long." I'm just like, dude, you guys can binge 7 hours worth of TV, and you're
Yeah.
telling me a film. And it's been a discussion that's still going on today, even when last year Oppenheimer came out, and what was the Scorsese movie, Killers of the Flower Moon? They were like
Yeah.
3 hours. I was like, it's sometimes movies going to go through, but great, awesome. It's all about the content. If the quality is good, who cares how long it goes for, right? And
Well, I learned from that. I learned from that mistake, to be honest with you. I mean, I realized that Rage was so um, unavailable to audiences. You know, I've now cut it down to an hour 50. Um,
what
hopefully,
Rage
Rage,
or Freelance?
Rage.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm hopefully we'll get it out to an Australian audience early next year. But no, like Australia hasn't seen Rage. It's not available here. It's not readily people haven't an Australian audience has not seen that film at all. Even with making this one, the first cut of it was 2.5 hours. You know,
hmm.
but this time I learnt from my mistake of Rage is just cut, just be brutal, cut. And you know, it's really hard because you know I had to inform a couple of actors, hey, your scene's been cut. You know,
Yeah.
that's always hard to do and all that. But I was very, very brutal with the cutting because I learned from what the audience said, you know. And you learn with every film. I know I've made mistakes with this one probably, and I'll probably learn more with the next one and the next one and the next one. If you're not learning as a filmmaker, you're going to stay stagnant, you
Hmm.
know. So yeah, Rage, Rage is still special to me, but I consider that my film school, to be
Hmm.
honest. Yeah.
Well, you know how much I love Rage when we talked
I
about it
much
last time.
appreciate it. I loved it. I love that you wrote such kind words about it. So it was much appreciated.
And Freelance as well. Love Freelance as well. And so for everyone out there listening, Monster Fest. So on October 12th, 2:30 p.m., Cinema Nova. You got to have the movie, and it's going to be followed by a Q&A with John. You have also Nicole there as well for Q&As afterwards. And I'm sure you guys are going to get a lot of questions about the making of film because number one, it's going to floor people, and then number two, just like the filmmaking process of it as well. I
We'll
think a
see.
lot of
Fingers
people
crossed.
are going to get into it. And I really recommend people that if you're in Melbourne at time, Cinema Nova, make sure you watch Freelance at Monster Fest because it's a really great film. And John, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your movie as well. And yeah, I can't wait to talk again in the future. And let me, as soon as we know when Rage is coming out in Oz and when Freelance has that, we're thinking what, January release date, yeah?
January 25. Yep.
When that happens, let me know again so I can re-upload this and my review again and everything so we can get people going again because I'm gonna have my review up not long after this podcast comes up this week.
Well, looking
So
forward to it.
yeah, thank you for your time, man.
Always much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.